Another method for both protection and automation is the use of names and ranges. It'll protect our formulas because they're a little bit easier to read. And they will also automate formulas because of the fact that we don't have to worry about very extensive expressions within them. When I talk in terms of a named range, I'm talking of the cell address. If I click on cell A2, you'll notice up in the corner that there is a name box. A2 is the name of this cell. However, I can name this cell whatever I want to. I'm going on the name box, I'm highlighting the cell name A2, and I'm going to just name it total. I'll hit enter, and that accepts my change. Now I'm simply going to type a number in that cell. Here's the advantage. In a normal formula, I would start with an equal. You could start with a plus also. Select my cell. Notice how the name of that cell comes up as total now. The idea is that rather than having to look at a formula that says A2, which can be somewhat cumbersome to read, I can actually just rename that as anything I want to. When I now type in total and I hit enter, the value from A2 appears. How does this become useful? Well, let's look at an example right within the table that you see on the screen. You will notice that I'm calculating the percentage of total. In order to do so, what I need to do is first go down to the end of total and turn on my AutoSum. The AutoSum, indicated by the icon, tells me that I now have a total. To calculate the percentage of this total, I would simply take my formula and I will divide cell H8, the 978, by the total, or 6828. The enter key, of course, is going to plug in that total. But look what happened to each one of the individual cells. They all gave me a divide by 0. That's because Excel, by definition, uses what is called relative reference. When using this relative reference, it automatically shifted H15 to the next cell down. If you look at H15 though, there's nothing here. Now notice the indicator. The indicator is trying to help me with this particular mistake. So what's the solution? Normally, in our originating cell, we would make the total an absolute value. To do so, I'm going up to the formula bar and I'm going to press F4 on my keyboard. That automatically puts a $sign in front of the H and in front of the 14. Now if you like, you can type those $signs in. However, it's much easier to use function 4, F4 on your keyboard. At this point, I will now go to the autofill. I'll fill down my cells and you'll notice that the calculation works. Off to the side, the little smart tag, it's just asking me if I'd like to copy, if I'd like to change my format, or just fill as is. The smart tag will disappear upon my next entry. Now that was pretty cumbersome to get that total working that way. Here's where our named range comes in. I'm going back to the 6828. Notice in the name box it's H14. Once again, I'll highlight it. This time, I'm going to go ahead and call this particular cell subtotal. And again, I'm going to hit enter. Going back to my formula, instead of using the absolute value of cell H14, I'm going to fill it in with the word subtotal. You will now notice that it automatically created subtotal in each of the equations. Now a note of interest. You notice how 2007 automatically calculated my formulas going down. This is now a built-in feature of 2007 when using the table function. Those of us in 2003, we would still need to go to the autofill and simply drag it down. The idea here is that rather than having to use the absolute value of the cell, I can use the word subtotal. We'll continue with more examples of how this named range can help us in our upcoming movie. Having worked with a name, let's take it a step further and see where this can be really useful within a formula. I've set up an example where I'd like to count fruit. In particular, I'd like to count just the apples. Now the function I am using in this instance is called COUNTIF. The way the formula is developed, I'm to tell it the range, E2 to E10, and then the criteria. What am I looking for? Apples. At this point, if I double-click on the cell, it will now show me the exact range that I'm counting and will give me help on the formula automatically. In this case, it's verifying that the range is E2 to E10, and again, the apples is the criteria. Now we'll be going into much further detail on formulas a little later in the video, but for right now I just wanted to briefly introduce you to the COUNTIF. You'll notice that it's a bit cumbersome having to read E2 to E10. Names will simplify this greatly. Let's do an example. I'd like to do the count. Instead of using just the range, I'm going to highlight the entire column. I am now going to the name box in the corner, highlighting E1, and I'm going to type fruit on top. Remember, it's very important to hit enter, as that's what stores or saves the name. Now let's go over to the side and do a new formula. We always start with an operator, an equal, plus or minus. COUNTIF is the function, and we always have parentheses to define our criteria. In this case, first I need to put in the range. Instead of highlighting cells, I'm simply going to type in fruit. Notice that the whole column is now highlighted for me. Once again, I'll put in the comma and type in what I'm looking for, or in this case, apples. Finish with the formula and those parentheses, hit the enter key. You'll notice I have exactly the same component. Notice though, it's much easier to read the formula. Notice how it's fruit. If I go above, it was E2 to E10. In a long, complicated formula, that can work wonders without having all of those cell ranges in the formula. There's another big advantage. Let's say, for instance, that I go a little bit further in the column and I type in apples and hit enter. Notice how the named range changed to 7. However, my original formula did not. It was locked into a particular range as defined by me. When we used the name, it was the entire column. As a result, anywhere I go, whether it is in the original area or if it's a bit below, it will change. Working with these ranges really simplifies how we're reading our formulas. I use them consistently. Do a little work with them, practice, and you'll find they really simplify the complexities of the formula. As we start working with our names, we'll need to actually manage them, know what's in a worksheet, and what if somebody else created names? How do we find them all? In 2007, we are going to use the Name Manager. You'll notice I'm on the Formulas ribbon, Name Manager. When I enter the Name Manager, it will give me a listing of all the names that exist within the actual spreadsheet. In 2003, when we were looking for that listing, we would go to the Insert menu, down to Name, and to Define. In prior versions, Define not only allowed us to create a new name, but also gave us a listing of all the names. Let's talk about 2007 first. I'm in cell A1. I am going to simply go to our name box, type in cell, and I have named that cell. Let's put a value in. I'm going to put a value in as the spelled out number 1. Let's now go to the Name Manager. In the Manager, notice that the name I just gave to cell 1 exists. It even tells me the value. Now this is a new feature in 2007. In the past, we would know the name and what it referred to, but not the actual value itself. You'll notice refers to is showing me the exact syntax of that cell. First, all formulas begin with some type of operator, in this case an equal sign. Next, our worksheet, followed by an exclamation mark, and then our cell. Notice 2007 is in single quotes. If we look at the Worksheet tab, the Worksheet tab is 2007. Worksheets are surrounded by single quotes in 2007. If I look at the separator now, you'll see an exclamation sign and then the cell. Notice the absolute reference is used in this cell. The same thing would happen if I named a column. Let's say, for instance, I'd like to name the column B. Now we've already used the named box. Let's do a different technique. On my ribbon, you will see Define Name. You will notice here it's asking for a new name. I'll call this column. On the bottom, notice again the syntax or the cell reference. Worksheet name, exclamation mark, and cell. However, this isn't one cell, it's a range of a column, so notice it's saying between B and B, column B. Again I say OK, once again return to the Name Manager, and once again my name column, the values, and the reference. Notice these values have double quotes. That's what Excel uses for a blank space. Let's close, go to B1, type in a 1, and use the autofill to put in some numbers. Back to the Name Manager, and you'll notice once again it fills in the series. The Name Manager is a wonderful way to see everything that's happening and the values. Now what about the legacy systems? Let's go to 2003 define on the bottom. What you'll want to keep in mind in 2003 that the function is the same, it's just called define. Now once I have defined that, you will see in the define name that the difference is that it will list all of the different names in the workbook. I'm on the name cell. Once again on the bottom, it's telling me what it refers to. I'm going to remove this screen, go to a bottom screen, and you'll notice column. Column, once again, tells me what it refers to. In this case, the tab is called 2003 Define, and once again it shows me the syntax. Now notice, the Define Name box is very similar to what we're looking at in the Name Manager. The only difference, we do not have the column for value. Once again, keep in mind, as you're working with these tasks in 2003, the components are the same, the dialog boxes are similar, just a few changes. In this particular instance, in 2007, the Name Manager just took us to the next level.